Chapter 10. A Big Mistake. George and Harold sat together in the detention room, reading through their newest comic book and beaming proudly. "You've got to go to the office and make copies of this," said George, "so we can sell them on the playground tomorrow." "We can't," said Harold. "Don't you remember? Mr. Krupp said he'd suspend us if he caught us leaving this room." "Then we won't let him catch us," said George. George and Harold sneaked out of the room quietly and crawled down the hall to the office. "Uh-oh," said Harold. "There's a bunch of teachers in there. We'll never get to use the copy machine." Said George. "Are there any other copy machines in the school?" "How about the one that Melvin had in the gym?" asked Harold. "Oh, yeah," said George. George and Harold crept over to the gym and found the Patsy 2000. "I wonder if this machine still makes copies," said Harold. "Melvin did say that he had made some adjustments to it." "Oh, he probably just crammed a mouse in there to fool us," said George. "It's the oldest trick in the book. I'm sure the machine still makes regular copies." George placed the cover of their new comic book face down on the glass screen and pressed start. All at once, the lights in the whole school dimmed, and the Patsy 2000 began to shake and chunk around wildly. Giant volts of static electricity zapped out the bottom of the machine as a great whirlwind rose from the top. Loose papers and other small objects in the room were sucked into the wind, and they spun above the machine like a raging cyclone. "I don't think it's supposed to do this!" shouted George over the horrible noise. Finally, after a series of flashes and loud zaps, the noise, wind, and sparks stopped altogether. The only sound that could be heard was of something groaning and clawing about inside the bloated, battered frame of the Patsy 2000. "It sounds like something's alive inside of there," said Harold. George snatched a comic book from the top of the machine. "Let's get out of here!" he cried. Just then, a small ding was heard, and a full-size, shiny white toilet emerged from the side of the Patsy 2000. Its teeth were sharp and jagged, and its angry eyeballs glowed with red, swelling veins. "Yum, yum, eat 'em up!" cried the evil toilet. Almost immediately, another talking toilet emerged, followed by another and another and another. "Yum, yum, eat 'em up!" they cried. "Oh no, Melvin was right. The photoatomic transom gobbling ectophan tripletonic zanziptomizer really does create living, breathing, three-dimensional copies of two-dimensional images," Harold cried convolutedly. "I've got an idea," said George. "What?" asked Harold. "Run!" cried George. Chapter 11. The Invention Convention, Detention Suspension. George and Harold screamed and ran out the gym door, closing it tightly behind them. "Aha!" yelled Mr. Krupp, who was just coming down the hall. "You boys left the detention room. You know what that means, don't you?" "It wasn't our fault!" cried Harold. "Too bad!" Mr. Krupp shouted with delight. "You boys are officially suspended!" "Wait," cried George. "You gotta listen. Behind this door is an army of evil, vicious talk." "I don't have to listen to you boys ever again," laughed Mr. Krupp. "Now get your stuff and get out of the school." But, Harold stammered. "You don't understand." "Get out!" Mr. Krupp screamed. George and Harold groaned and walked to their lockers to collect their stuff. "Gosh," said Harold, "in one day we've gotten a detention to suspension, and we've created an army of evil talking toilets who want to take over the world. That's a pretty bad day, even by our standards," said George. "Oh, well," said Harold, "I just hope things don't get any worse." Chapter 12. Things Get Worse. Word spread quickly throughout the office that George and Harold had been suspended. The teachers rushed out to cheer and laugh at the two boys. "You're in big trouble now," chuckled Miss Anthrope. "I can't wait to call your parents and tell them the news." "Let's take their desks outside and chop them up," cried Miss Ribble. "Let's throw a party in the gyms," shouted Mr. Meaner. "No!" cried George. "Whatever you do, don't open the door to the gym. We can do whatever we like," snarled Mr. Meaner as he dashed over to the gymnasium door. "Look, I'm opening the door." He quickly opened the gym door. "Now I'm closing the door," he said. "Now I'm opening the door again, and now I'm An evil toilet had stuck its mouth through the door, snapped Mr. Meaner up, and swallowed him whole. Flush! The talking toilets then pushed their way through the open gymnasium doors and spilled out into the hallway. "Yum, yum, eat 'em up," the toilets bellowed. "Yum, yum, eat 'em up." The teachers couldn't believe their eyes. They screamed and ran for their lives. Only Mr. Krupp, Miss Ribble, and George and Harold remained, frozen in fear. They watched, paralyzed, as the talking toilets came nearer and nearer. Finally, Miss Ribble pointed at the toilets and snapped her fingers. Finally, Miss Ribble just turned and ran. Mr. Krupp, however, just stood there in a daze. George and Harold looked up at him. "Uh-oh," said Harold. "Did she just snap her fingers?" "Yep," said George. "Now we're really in trouble." And George was right, for at that moment Mr. Krupp had begun to change. A silly, heroic smile came over his face as he stood defiantly before his foes. "I'll put a stop to you, vile villains," he said fiercely. "But first, I need some supplies." Mr. Krupp turned and dashed to his office. George and Harold ran after him. "Why did Miss Ribble have to snap her fingers?" cried Harold. "Why?" "Never mind that," cried George. "Mr. Krupp is turning into Captain Underpants. We gotta pour water over his head before it's too late." Chapter 13. It's too late! When George and Harold reached Mr. Krupp's office, they found only his clothes, shoes, and toupee on the floor. "Look," said Harold, "the window is open and one of the red curtains is missing." "What do we do now?" asked George. "Do we save Captain Underpants, or do we stay here and get eaten by a bunch of toilets?" Let me think about that one," said Harold as he climbed out the window. George quickly collected Mr. Krupp's things and shoved them into his backpack. Then he jumped out the window after Harold. The two boys slid down the flagpole and ran off after Captain Underpants. "Where does he think he's going?" asked George. "I have no idea," said Harold, but we better run fast, because I think we're being followed." Captain Underpants dashed through the backyards of some nearby houses and collected pairs of underwear from the clotheslines. "Mommy," said a little boy looking out his window, "a man in a red cape just stole our underwear." "And now 2 boys are being chased by a ferocious-looking toilet with sharp, pointy teeth, screaming, 'Yum, yum, eat 'em up!'" "Yeah, right," laughed his mother. "Just how gullible do you think I am?" Chapter 14. The Talking Toilet Takeover. When Captain Underpants was finished commandeering the underwear of local civilians, he dashed back to Jerome Horwitz Elementary School to save the day. Horwitz Elementary... The school was now overrun with chaos. Miss Ribble came tearing out the door, followed by several evil toilets. "Help me!" she cried. "They've swallowed every teacher in the whole building except me." "Don't worry, ma'am. I won't let them eat you up," Captain Underpants said, as a toilet ate her up. "Oops," said Captain Underpants. Now only George, Harold, and Captain Underpants were left. They stood on the front lawn of the school, completely surrounded by hungry, drooling toilets. "Yum, yum, eat 'em up," the talking toilets chanted. "Yum, yum, eat 'em up. Yum, yum, eat 'em up. Yum, yum, eat 'em up." "We're doomed!" cried Harold. "Never underestimate the power of underwear," cried Captain Underpants as he stretched and shot underwear into the waiting mouths of the talking toilets. Unfortunately, the toilets just swallowed the underwear whole. It only seemed to make them hungrier and hungrier. "If only we could think of something that will make them really sick," said George. "Yeah," Harold continued, "something so vile and disgusting it will make them all blow their cookies and writhe in agony." Suddenly, George and Harold's faces lit up. "Cafeteria food!" they shouted, and faster than a speeding waistband, our 3 heroes dashed into the school. Chapter 15. Cream Chip Beef to the Rescue! George, Harold, and Captain Underpants got inside the school safely and closed the front door behind them. "I think the toilets are all outside," said George. "But not for long," said Harold. Quickly, they ran to the school's kitchen and discovered a cart holding a large vat of something green and sludgy. "Yuck," said George, holding his nose. "What is that stuff?" "I think it's tomorrow's lunch," said Harold. "Perfect," said George. "I never thought I'd be glad to see cream chip beef." Together, they wheeled the tub of stinky green slop down the hallway and out the side door of the school. Captain Underpants sat on the cart and stretched a pair of underwear over his head like a slingshot. George stood over him, scooped some cafeteria food into the underwear, and stretched it back. Harold wheeled the cart toward the talking toilets. "Tra-la-la!" shouted Captain Underpants loudly. The talking toilets turned and saw our 3 heroes. All at once they shouted, "Yum, yum, eat 'em up," and the chase was on. Harold pulled the cart across the playground as the toilet zipped after them. "Fire 1!" cried Captain Underpants. George shot a glob of cream chip beef into the first toilet's mouth. The toilet swallowed it whole. Harold kept pulling as George scooped another serving into the underwear and pulled it back. "Fire too!" cried Captain Underpants. Zip went the cafeteria food right into the second toilet's mouth. The whole process repeated itself until every last toilet had swallowed at least 2 servings of cream chip beef. "We're almost out of ammo!" Captain Underpants shouted. "And I don't think I can run any more," said Harold, huffing and puffing. "Don't worry, look," said George, pointing at the toilets. They had all slowed down and were beginning to groan and wobble around. Their eyes crossed and they turned an odd shade of green. "Look out!" cried Harold. "I think they're gonna hurl!" And that's just what they did. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants watched as the toilets upchucked everything they had eaten during the day. The cream chip beef, the underwear, even the teachers all came out without a scratch. Then the toilet spun around in small circles and fell to the ground dead. George checked the teachers. "They're alive," he said. "Unconscious, but alive." "Wow," said Harold. "That was easy." "Too easy," said George. "What do you mean?" asked Harold. George pulled their comic book out of his backpack and showed it to Harold. "Remember how the Patsy 2000 turned everything on the front cover of our comic book to life?" he asked. "Yeah, so?" said Harold. "Well," said George as he pointed to the Turbo Toilet 2000 on the front cover of the comic, "we haven't seen him yet." Chapter 16, The Turbo Toilet 2000. Suddenly, the Turbo Toilet 2000 came trudging out the front door of the school with a terrible crash. The earth rumbled beneath its mighty footsteps as nearly as a ton of twisting steel and raging porcelain descended upon our heroes. Crash! "You 3 meddling fools may have destroyed my army of talking toilets," screamed the Turbo Toilet 2000, "but you're all out of cafeteria food. How are you gonna stop me?" "I'll tell you how," Captain Underpants said boldly, "with wedgie power!" "Wait, Captain Underpants!" cried George. "You can't fight that thing. He'll rip you to pieces." "Boys," said Captain Underpants nobly, "I must fight valiantly for truth, justice, and all that is pre-shrunk and cottony." Captain Underpants leaped onto the Turbo Toilet 2000 and the battle began. "I sure hope this doesn't lead to extremely graphic violence," said Harold. "Me too," said George. Warning: the following chapter contains intense scenes showing a man in his underwear battling a giant toilet. Please do not try this at home. And here's the flipperama thing. Wedgie power versus potty power. Oh no, the potty power punch prevails. The carnivorous commode captures the captain.